All right, good morning. So before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge a few additional people. Everett Bass, our dear friend, he's helped grow and sustain this organization, so I want to recognize Everett. Also, Harry Hayes, he also used to be one of us. And Brenda Haney, the outgoing president of SWANA. Thank you, Brenda. And I'm sure we'll continue to acknowledge others, but thank you all for very much for being here. I also wanted to say that some thanks to Republic Services, Gianna and Matt, for last night's event over at Britt's Pub and Lawn Bowling. So thank you to Republic. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mark Woolfolk, who's going to moderate this next session. So, Mark.
Without dropping the notebook. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Woolfolk, and I have the privilege of serving as the director for the City of Houston Solid Waste Management Department. So any of y'all who know anything about Houston, you're probably saying he call that a privilege, huh? So, all right. So a little icebreaker. We're all familiar with rate increases, and most of us as, municipalities or cities understand the significance of having a rate, to support your operations. But to open up, I like to ask, who out there has gone the longest without a rate increase? Can anyone think of any city out there that has gone a sustained period of time, perhaps more than 5 years, without a rate increase? Just a show of hands, yeah. How long? 10 years. How about you? 6? I saw a hand in the back. 5 and up front? 11. Okay. I'm here to tell you today, the city of Houston has all of you all beat, right? If you can take all of those years, combine them into one, and multiply them 10 times over, we would still have you beat because the city of Houston does not have a rate to sustain its operation. That's right, folks. 4th largest city. And we're proud of that too, but we do not have a rate to sustain our operations. So you can imagine what kind of challenge that may present as costs continue to rise across the board, in terms of equipment, human resources, infrastructure, equipment, you name it. So this is before we even begin to think about improving services that we have to deal with this, enhancements in technology that are designed to make our jobs, more efficient. And then another thing about the city of Houston is it's so political, right? So we have 16 council members to deal with, so if you could imagine, if you look at our friends in DC, trying to get them all to agree. Now bring that down to have 16 people at the local level all agree on the same thing, right? So I can tell you how many times, or I need more hands to tell you how many times that has not happened. So as many of you know, and you've heard me talk about this before, maybe doing social events and whatnot, this particular moment, this topic that we're going to discuss today is of particular interest to me because I am very interested in trying to move the City of Houston Solid Waste Management Department from a general fund department to an enterprise fund department. So what I'm hopeful for is that our friend, Scott Pasternak with Burns and McDowell will have some tools, tips, and tricks, even magic tricks, Jedi mind tricks, whatever, that can help convince our elected officials, mayors, and whatnot, and the general public that it's really time for, solid waste management departments who are operating as a general fund to start functioning like the businesses that they're designed to function. So let's get into it. So Scott, I understand this morning we're gonna have an interactive session, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'm gonna turn it over to you. So please welcome Scott Pasternak.
Hey, Mark, thanks for that great introduction. I'm going to go down here so that I can be a little bit more interactive with you all. And Mark, I think that was a great way to introduce what we're going to talk about today. And the premise of this discussion is that right now we're facing relatively unprecedented financial challenges. But with within any challenge is also an opportunity. So that's what we want to talk about today is what are you going to do as far as making the case for putting a rate increase in place. So whether you're like the city of Houston that has never had a rate, or some of the cities that have gone multiple years, or maybe you are even a city that, hey, we just had a rate increase 2 years ago. You know, how is it going to be perceived if we go back to city council and ask for another one? So we're going to start off with a discussion that I've titled Making the Case. So in that, I want to share with you all some ideas that we have that are real world examples where we have worked with our clients on these types of ideas. But the whole idea of this discussion is going to be for us to share with you all just 5 examples that where we've worked with other cities on, but they're intended just to be examples because we want you all to just be thinking about what are the financial drivers within your own cities or counties that you can then take back home and then talk to either your city manager or your elected officials when there's a need for a rate increase. It's also really important to make sure that you have a sound methodology. So we're going to talk about that for probably a total of about 3 minutes. So we'll limit that. Okay, that's my promise to you this morning. And then based on what we talk about in terms of making the case, we're going to share with you all some real world examples of where we worked with some of our clients to help them get rate increases in place. So as far as our qualifications to talk to you all about this, Burns & Mack advises our municipal clients on a wide range of solid waste and recycling issues, and financial projects are a key focus of that. So I'm approaching almost my 25th year of advising clients on these types of matters, and going to share with you all some of the challenges that we have faced, maybe not over the entire 25 years, but we'll go back a little bit in time on some of the examples. So in terms of making the case, you know, for you all as solid waste directors, I mean, what is the most challenging thing that you have to do in your job? I mean, clearly if you have a safety issue, you know, those are the most challenging. If you have other disciplinary issues with your staff, you know, that's a real challenge as well. But going before your elected officials to say, we need a rate increase is really a really relevant and challenge as well. And that's where there's an opportunity that we have not seen at this level of understanding, again, for almost 25 years. And what I mean by that is when we go and talk with either city managers or elected officials, you know, they simply, for the most part, they get it. They understand what the cost drivers are. If a few years ago, if you had talked to somebody and said the word CPI, they would have had no clue what you're talking about. Now everybody knows what CPI is, right? And they understand whether you're an elected official or if you are a member of the general public who you're going to be ultimately requesting to pay those rate increases. So what we want to do with you all this morning is, again, I'm going to show you five examples to get you all thinking about how do you make that case. And it'll be up to you all to decide which of those 5 are applicable for your community to take back home. But just as importantly, there's tons of other examples. I know Richard and I were talking about a few of those last night that are affecting the city of Austin, for example. So we're going to have, it'll be pretty brief, but hopefully 5 or 10 minutes of a facilitated discussion for you all to come up with some additional ideas. Because what I want to accomplish this morning is for you to have a laundry list. Maybe not everything on that list is going to apply to your community, but you can at least have several things to be able to take back so that you can make that case. So rather than me just present to you all this morning, we're going to play the match game. All right, so this is the Scott Pasternak variation of the match game. I will tell you in a moment how we're going to play. It does involve the raffle tickets that hopefully are on your table. I intentionally did not put raffle tickets on the back tables, but Bob Craigs will help out if you do not have raffle tickets, and I'll explain in just a minute how we're going to play. Also, I'll explain in a moment how you are going to win, because there are real prizes, and those prizes are up there at the front. So in terms of how to play, with this being the match game, in a couple of slides, I'm going to show you 5 categories. And then based on those 5 categories, I'm going to show you kind of a generic slide that's going to have some, but not all of the information, and then definitely not the title. And then you're going to vote using multiple choice, using a poll everywhere. And I'll show you the QR code in just a moment. So you'll be able to select how does that slide match up with one of the 5 categories. And each category is going to be used just one time. So even if you get the first 4 wrong, hopefully you'll get that 5th one right, okay? This is not intended to be the SAT. This is intended to really just get everybody kind of thinking. So in terms of the how to participate, hopefully this QR code is large enough for everybody in the room. And I do recommend utilizing the QR code as the way to participate. But if you want to just use it the traditional texting way, if you text in the subject line BMCD to 22333, that should get you in as well. So my biggest question of the day, is that working for everybody okay? Okay. Anybody having any technical challenges? Okay. Now I can breathe that sigh of relief. And Juby, thank you to you, Matt, Paulo, the whole team at MWMA to help with that technology. So I definitely appreciate that. So again, in terms of how to win, everybody should have a set of 5 raffle tickets. And so when you get a question correct, tear off one of those raffle tickets. Each ticket will have 2 pieces. You keep one and then put the other one in the small Ziploc bag in the middle of the table. Okay. So Bob will be able to give more to some of these full tables, so that's great to see.
Anybody need more tickets?
All right. So then for each one that you get correct, there's a small Ziploc bag in the middle of your table. Just simply place it in there. After we go through each of these 5 categories, Bob will collect all of the tickets, transfer station style, and then we will put them into a larger Ziploc bag for the drawing at the end. So the prizes are up here. So there's a cooler backpack, a blanket, a battery charger, and then 3 types of water containers. So we've got something for all different geographies, whether it's hot, cold, arid, whatever you need. It will be, just so that there's no fighting on this, the first one drawn gets the first choice, okay? And then we'll just go sequentially. Is everybody good? Good with that? Okay. All righty. So everybody's good on the QR code, right? All righty. So here are the 5 categories. The first one is recycling blues. The second is reserve funds ain't what they used to be, followed by CPI versus garbage and trash index, how much for that truck, and fortune teller. All righty. So these will be the 5 categories. So what I'm going to do now is I'm showing a slide that communicates one of those 5 categories. So just take a quick look at it. Hopefully this one is not too hard. And then we'll vote, and then we'll see what the answer is. All right, so the votes are coming in. So some good perspectives. I'm not going to go back. You got to pay attention. We are tough. Actually, I don't know if I can go back. Can I go back? All right. I was just kidding. I went back. I won't go back for long, though. So, is everybody good? Okay. All righty. So, the correct answer for this one is D, how much for that truck? So, if you answer D, so that should be 4 out of 5 people at each table. Tear off your ticket and put it in the middle. If you don't, don't worry about it. Also, keep in mind, each one is only going to be used once. So hopefully we will not see D appear going forward. So this one is how much for that truck. We have seen very significant increases in the price of vehicles over the last several years. Number of those price drivers are on the right-hand side. So the purpose of this slide to communicate to your elected officials is that this is just one example of costs that are increasing at a very rapid rate. I'm not going to say what a bunch of the other categories could be because I want to save that for you all to tell back to us. But trucks are just one of many examples that we could have used here, right?
What's the size of that bin? That looks a little big. 95? No, like 110?
Yeah. I thought, yeah, so our marketing person was the one that put this slide together with the truck, and I thought, should I just change that to just a run-of-the-mill ASL truck so it matches, but I decided not to, but maybe that was. All right, so here's the next one. So on this one, it shows 2 line graphs and 2 bar charts, and then across the bottom of the slide are the years starting with 2012 and then progressing to 2022. All right. All right. I think because I got to go to this next slide. Is it working now? Okay. And if the technology doesn't work, we can always do this the old-fashioned way, just by a show of hands. So you guys are voting, but it's not showing up? Okay. All right, now that I showed the answer, now it's working. So all right. Does anybody still need to vote? All right. So you all did great on this one. Yes, the answer is CPI versus garbage and trash index. So that's what it shows at the top of the slide. And so the dark blue bars is just regular CPI, and then the lighter blue is the garbage and trash index. And then the lighter blue is also the garbage and trash index. And then the green is the CPI. So what this is showing is that over the past 10 years, the cost for you all to run your operations, whether you're a municipally operated or if you contract out with the private sector, your costs are increasing year over year on average at a higher rate than what the regular rate of inflation is. And so this is very powerful information. In fact, we communicated this with a city that we worked with this past summer, and showing this kind of information, kind of creates an instant moment of them thinking, okay, now we get it. Now we understand why you need an X% rate increase for your city. All right. So here is the next one. It's simply the percentage 3.7. So and remember, nobody should pick C or D, hopefully. But if you did, that's okay. So I was hoping this one would be a little tougher. And you all are probably wondering what the heck even is 3.7, right? All right. Has everybody voted? All right. So raise your hand if you picked the letter E, fortune teller. All right. Anybody want to guess what 3.7 is? Because you're right if you said fortune teller. Correct. So what Richard said is estimated increases in future inflation. So specifically, so whenever we're doing a cost of service rate design study that includes a forecast, we need to provide an estimate of how you think costs may increase in the future. And so for the last 20 years or so, that had been a relatively stable type of question to answer, but it's become much more challenging in the last few years. And so as we're working with our clients, and I don't think anybody really knows exactly what the future is going to hold from an inflationary perspective, but there is a part of the Federal Reserve that does a forecast of economists across the country and asks them what do they think is going to happen from a CPI perspective. And then at Burns & McDonnell, what we have done is looked at that historical information in terms of the difference between the CPI and then the garbage and trash index, and then just added a percentage point to that. So it's essentially 2.7% from the Federal Reserve forecast plus another 1%. And this is really relevant to be able to communicate to your elected officials, hey, we don't have we are not fortune tellers. We don't know exactly how this is going to unfold, but we think there's a decent likelihood that the costs for the solid waste industry are going to continue to outpace regular inflation. And so for the city that may have had your last rate increase 2 years ago, this could be the type of information that's very meaningful if you need to go back for another rate increase. All right. So I will explain what all these lines mean in just a moment. And we're also going to use this same slide later on in the presentation. But before everybody gotten a little bit of a view of what this one is? Okay. So go ahead and vote. So this topic actually came up over beers last night. I did not bring up the topic, but it was very, very timely. And so great job for 91% of you, where that answer is reserve funds ain't what they used to be. And so what this is showing is where the current financial situation is. Oh, laser. Okay. That one? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. So this city has a reserve fund policy where they need to have 60 days of operating cash in place. So this is where they should be at all times, right? Whereas the amount of cash that they have at the end of 2023 is just above zero. Call it probably a couple $100,000. And then right below that is this number here, which you can't see very well because they're about breaking even. So that blue bar represents how much all of their costs are as compared to how much revenue they have coming in. So they're pretty much flat. And then if they don't have a rate increase, what will happen with these blue bars is that they will start to under recover. So they're going to be spending more than the revenue that they have coming in from rates. So this one is absolutely showing that they need a rate increase because it is unsustainable for them to continue operating under these conditions. All right. So remember, I said each category is only going to be used one time, right? So, yep. Yeah, I hit the wrong button. There we go. So I don't like pressing too many buttons on these things. All right, here is the last question. So two numbers, $12 million and $35 million for 2 different years. Everybody good on this one? Okay. Well, but I know you got to vote yet, but everybody's got a good understanding of what's here. Okay. All right. All right. Good. Yeah, good. Good answers there. So yeah, this one is focused on recycling. So what this is showing is this is the cost of a brand new 35 ton per hour recycling system. So just the equipment only. So a lot of these costs are going to be great improvements to processing systems for things like increased optical sorting. There's also, with the newer equipment, you can reduce your labor costs. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one type trade-off, because even though you're spending more on capital, you may have a reduction on your O&M costs. But nevertheless, the cost of an average, large-sized MRF, as far as just the equipment, has just about tripled in 7 years. And so how many cities here or counties contract out for recycling processing? All right, so quite a few. So the next time that you've got to go back to your city council for a new contract, and if that pricing has increased significantly and you correspondingly may need a rate increase, this is the type of information that could be very beneficial to share. So like I said at the beginning of the discussion, what I was showing there were just a few examples to get you all thinking about what would be relevant for your community. So what we'd like for you to do now is hopefully you can just free-form type in additional ideas that you have as far as what are some of the cost drivers that are relevant to your city. And then let's take about 5 to 7 minutes just for folks to provide some additional perspective on that. So is there anybody who would like to just talk about for just very briefly what you see as some of the key other cost drivers for your community? So I'll repeat that one, but I want to make sure we hopefully get that on the microphone for those who are participating remotely. But I think that was just increased contributions to the general fund.
Or to increase contributions to the overhead, in other words.
Right, overheads.
Utilities, finances,
Yep.
our rent.
Yeah, that's.
In the city building went holistic.
Yeah, that's a great example. We have these price or CPI impacts are putting a lot of pressure on the general fund. Solid waste is generating revenue, so driving increases for that as well. All right, so this word cloud is definitely is going pretty good. So some of the other key ones that we're seeing are categories like salaries and staffing, so very much related. When I was putting the presentation together, I was debating whether to include that one, but decided just to go with the cost of equipment. But who else has some other ones that are not seen here or that you want to just talk about briefly?
The added responsibility for homeless camping cleanups.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is a very good example as we're working with multiple other cities, like Jill from the city of Albuquerque is referring to where, for whatever reason, I think it's because the solid waste department does such a great job on everything else. They say, hey, why don't you also take on responsibility for homelessness or various cleanups? I mean, it could be a variety of city services. So yeah, that's a great example. Who else has some other ones or other perspectives you want to share? And we'll be able to provide this listing from the word cloud out to everybody. We'll coordinate that with Juby so that you can get this listing in a more of a traditional bulleted format so that you can see it pretty easily. But any other ideas that anybody wants to share before we move on to the exciting methodology discussion? Okay, yep, coming on over.
Yeah, it's kind of enclosed in the FEMA, but during the pandemic, there was a transfer of waste due to the amount of remote working that was taking place. And so solid waste had to fill that gap.
Good deal. Thanks for that perspective, Harry. Anything else before we keep moving on? What we'll do now is, if everybody who answered your questions correctly, Bob will go around the room, and he will collect them. He will go in a dark room and certify all the raffle tickets, and he will emerge. So at the very end, we'll do the drawing, just to make sure everybody stays around for the exciting methodology discussion. And did, just to make sure we have it captured, looks like a lot of people were able to take a picture of this, right? Okay. All right. Juby's going to take one more. All right. Thanks, Paulo. All right. Thank you. All right. So I'm not going to spend much time from a methodology perspective, but this is really important. And it doesn't really matter whether you all do this, if you have the capacity within your own internal staff or if you hire a consultant, but going through a rigorous process so that when you get questions from the city manager or elected officials, you have very solid answers. And so from a full cost accounting perspective, this is the typical methodology that we go through to build a financial foundation. And so where you want to start with is your operating budget, but then to go through that budget to review it to see, are there any types of costs that you're incurring within your that may not be represented within your budget or need to be adjusted so that it's reflective of a more typical year. So if you own, say, a landfill, the cost of closure, post-closure, needs to be recognized on a proportional tonnage basis. Overtime is another frequent category where sometimes you may intentionally under budget for that within your operating budget, but unfortunately, overtime is going to creep up. And so if you're setting the foundation of what really occurs in a typical year, you want to have that reflected in what we call a test year revenue requirement. And then the next part is to then allocate that test year cost to all of your cost centers. So cost centers are simply the primary services that your city provides. This is just an example from a recent cost of service study that we did. And I'll show you how that information gets used in just a couple of minutes. And then from there, it's really important to then develop a robust financial model that's comprised of a series of inputs and analysis as shown on the left-hand side, and then the right-hand side shows various outputs and results. And so in terms of inputs, it's going to be categories like that cost of service or your test year revenue requirement, also looking at what your future O&M and capital costs are going to be. And then you can look at different scenarios in terms of what types and how much of rate increases that you may need, and benchmarking is also a very important component. And so then when you build this type of model, you can then get a number of different outputs and results so that you can run comparative analysis in terms of how do things look if you put in, say, a 10% rate increase for the first of the next 5 years as compared to multiple, say, 3% increases on a year-over-year basis. What are going to be your financing and funding requirements, as well as being able to run sensitivity analyses and then look at things from a future, typically a 5-year forecasting type basis. So that's it on the methodology perspective, but hopefully that gives you some perspective of how important that can be in terms of communicating. What I'm going to close out with is just a kind of a show and tell of some examples of clients that we've worked with. So this just simply shows the cost for a residential program a couple of different ways, but it's all the same cost information. So on the left-hand side, it shows the program costs by function. So I talked about one of my key categories is the cost of fleet. The cost of staffing, salaries was also identified. For this particular community, those two categories represent almost 60% of their total costs. So when you can go to the city council and say, hey, look, here's what's happening to our cost of equipment. We just had to do a X% increase in salaries. That's why we need the rate increase that we're requesting. And then also being able to show what your costs are for services like refuse collection, recycling collection, brush and bulky, disposal, everything else can also go a long way toward communicating why you need the requested rate increase. So this is the same slide that we showed a few minutes ago, and this is one that we worked with the city of Kansas City on over the summertime. So this is their current financial forecast and shows why they need to put a rate increase in place. So here at the bottom of the slide shows that we recommended and their commission is in the process of adopting new rate increases starting in the year 2024. That will be 85 cents per household per month, and then will increase just a little bit by about 5 to 10%, 5 to 10 cents per household per year. And so just by making these changes, they will, they're still going to under recover in 2024, but their city manager was comfortable with having that down year because they knew that they would be able to, on a short-term basis, make that up. And so they will essentially over recover the amounts that they need. So they're going to build on this green line their reserve fund so that by the year 2028, they will meet their reserve requirement goals. Now, this is something that's just very important to check with your elected officials as well as your city manager on, because in this particular case, they were comfortable with taking the full 5 years for those lines to essentially intersect. But you could be in a city where they say, oh man, we've got some really significant operational challenges, and so we need higher rate increases that much sooner to build up the reserves. And so that just depends on your particular community. We also did extensive benchmarking for Kansas City to be able to show how does their current rate compare to other communities in the metro region. And then even with that 85 cents, they were still at the lower end of what the cost would be among those cities. So you want to be careful when you're benchmarking. You know, if you're already down here at the bottom, you may not want to show as much of that, but in their case, it definitely worked to their benefit. And then also here on the right-hand side showing what services are included within that pricing. So I also wanted to talk to you all about what if you're in a city where you're just like, there's just no way we can get a residential rate increase right now. So maybe another dose of realism there. So I wanted to talk to you about another case study just real briefly about some alternative funding strategies. So this was another city that we've been working with for many years on within their solid waste system. So this city does own a landfill, and because of that landfill, they've built over time a very healthy reserve fund that in the year 2020 was about $30 million. But next to the city of Houston, this city, maybe I just gave it away there, they have not had a rate increase since, I think, 2007. And they've had a number of other increases for a number of their other utilities, so it's been important to them to hold as steady as they can on the residential side. But what we were able to show them is that with these green bars, they were under recovering on the residential side of things. And so we were forecasting a couple of years ago that they were going to not maintain their reserve levels in about the year 22. And then if they didn't have more revenue coming in, they would have more financial challenges down the road. So does that all make sense to everybody? Okay. And so what we did with this city was we helped them to expand their franchise fee, and then because they own a landfill, they've also put in place a landfill surcharge. So I know if you don't have a landfill, you can't do a landfill surcharge, and franchise fees are going to be more common in some parts of the United States than in others. But this city did have an existing franchise fee in place of 5%. Most of that was transferred to the general fund. But as a part of the cost of service analysis, we were able to show that the city was incurring significant costs that were benefiting commercial customers. And the franchise fee was used as a way to generate revenue from commercial businesses via the franchised haulers. And that money would then go toward the solid waste operations to offset the proportional costs that were being borne by the commercial customers and to provide some rate relief on the residential side. And then the other thing that we helped them to look at was implementing a landfill surcharge, and it's been implemented at various stages at a rate between $5 to $10 per ton. So when they were able to do that has provided a great amount of financial stability to where they On a net basis, we're back to over recovering as shown by these green bars. And so they were not drawing down too significantly in the next couple of years on their reserves, and then we're able to build that further over time. We're continuing to work with this city because they are at some point likely going to still need a residential rate increase even with these alternative strategies. So the last slide I want to talk about is just kind of showing that we don't necessarily have to be in the economic environment that we're in to be able to make a strong case for rate increases. And so I wanted to demonstrate that by showing an example of a client that we worked with back in 2017. And so at the time, this city had not had a rate increase since 2007. And at the time, their rate was, call it about $14.50 per household per month. And so we were recommending that they go to just under $17. It was about $16.50. And so there was one particular member of their city council that was threatening privatization and saying how inefficient the solid waste operation was, and just making a big fuss about these proposed increases. And so once we heard that from the council member, we worked with city staff and were able to show how their costs had actually changed over that 10-year period. And it really just worked out this way. But over that 10-year period, this bottom line, the green one, reflects the cost of CPI and how that changed. So the rate recommendation for this city pegged over 10 years almost exactly to where CPI was. And then we were able to also show that their costs were well below where it would have been had they had an increase that was pegged to the garbage and trash index. And so sometimes you just need to look at all the data and see how that can help you tell your story as well. So with that, that wraps up the presentation. I think we still have a few minutes to take any questions. And then after we take the questions, if Bob is back from the accounting office, we'll do the drawing in a few minutes. And then in the interest of time, if whoever wins, we can just figure out whether to grab your prizes now or at one of the upcoming breaks. So Mark?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head. I know that there's got to be some questions after that fabulous presentation. So, and we certainly want to encourage our folks who are joining us by Zoom as well to feel free to present the questions. So, one at the mic already.
This is on.
Yep.
Scott, do you know of any communities that actually do an annual rate increase based on the CPI?
Yeah, that's a great question, Richard. And I think his question was any cities that do an annual increase based on CPI. I think the real benefit of that is to kind of take the politics out of it. And there are a few cities that will do that, but that can also be a bit challenging in terms of that, where sometimes cities will have issues about whether you can commit a future elected body to rates. But there are a few out there that are willing to adopt a rate schedule for a series of years. But then also for those cities that are not willing to do that, there may be a need to say, hey, how can we design rates that may be a little bit higher in the first year or two if you're not able to be in a situation where you can get those rates in place year over year. Any other questions?
Yeah, Scott, how about, have you seen cities, and I think you just kind of alluded to that, that aren't staying on top of those adjustments that they need to besides Atlanta? I know that's always been a good example.
Yeah, that's a lot of times when we get hired is when a city recognizes that, holy cow, we really may need a rate increase. And so I think that's, again, where it's really important, and again, whether you do it on your own or you utilize a consultant, is to really stay on top of that. Because if you don't, it can really get away from you. Because I think it can be much more palatable if you go back to your council and say, hey, we just need another 50 cents next year, as compared to saying, yeah, I know you haven't seen us in 10 years and we need $8 per household per month. There is a community that we're working with right now that is probably going to be looking at about a $7 to $8 per household per month increase, because they haven't gotten their increases on a more frequent basis.
Good. And then another question that I have is, have you experienced any cities who got it right, you know, and are able to support general fund services as a result?
Yeah.
Maybe the benefits of that.
Well, when we've looked at that issue in terms of how much of a solid waste revenue requirement actually gets transferred over to the general fund, we've seen percentages that have ranged, I would say, typically from about 10 to even as high as 25%. And so those are very significant costs that need to be accounted for, and then that needs to be communicated as well. But that just becomes, you know, part of that financial discussion. And I think also to be able to, you can establish quite a bit of goodwill with your city council as well, if they understand, hey, we are contributing, you know, X millions of dollars per year to the general fund.
Right. And I'm just going to take a moment to give a shameless plug, you know, to myself. During my time prior to coming to the city of Houston, you know, I was in the city of Tampa for about 22, 23 years. And when I started, it's kind of funny, when I started with the city just initiated a bond, an $80 million bond, to help the waste energy plant kind of get back up to standards and get the normal, you know, latest and greatest operating capacity to meet EPA standards. So over the next 20 years, through the rate, and, you know, actually maintaining that rate at its levels that it was supposed to be maintained at, we paid those bonds off. So I got an opportunity to have basically like a $14 million swing. And, you know, when the elected officials saw that, their eyes got big. The next thing I know, you know, we're buying boats to clean the waterways, you know, we're building fences for the police department, you know, and a gun range for them and all this other stuff. So, but I think it's just important to make sure that even when you're in a good spot, to continue to manage those for those other increases that we have to deal with in the industry. So, great. All right. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So is there a recommended or typical reserve fund balance?
Yeah, so that's a great question in terms of a recommended reserve fund balance. And so much of that is going to depend on what's the type of operation that a city or a county has in place, and to think about what are the risk levels that you're having because of that. So if you have, say, collection vehicles, you know, unfortunately fires, you know, have happened where cities can lose multiple trucks at any given time. So to ask, you know, in a worst case scenario, do you have, you know, if it only takes 3 trucks to burn down, and that's $1 million or more cost to the city. Also, what other risks do you have with various types of facilities? And so I think it's going through that type of discussion to figure out what is appropriate for your community. But what we'll typically see in terms of just operating reserves is going to be kind of in a range of about 60 to 90 days of your annual operating costs. And that seems to be pretty sufficient for most operations, but again, that's where you just need to evaluate your own operation.
All right.
So any other questions, or everybody just wants to know if you're a winner? All right. If there's no other questions, we'll have Bob come over and do the drawing.
Well, I think you're going to do the drawing. I'm the accounting firm, so I gotta put
Can't
on
do both, right?
You
Yeah.
have to put on your glasses so you can read the numbers.
All right. The first one is, I'm just going to read the last 4, 5603. Okay.
All right.
Good deal.
So you get first choice.
Get first choice.
First choice.
And
Yeah.
let's say you can only win once. How about that? 5388. All right.
All right.
Good deal.
Mr. Pittman, yeah.
You're second.
Yeah.
5390.
I knew Brendan, keep me honest.
Does anybody have 5390?
Well, he had the same one, can't win. Sorry, you'll have to pull again.
Okay. 5496. All right. It's all because you asked a good question. So,
Yeah, all right.
so 5433. All right.
There we go. That would be
So we're at 4, right?
4. Yep.
5437. Okay.
There we go.
All right.
It's a table thing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They are being all super mixed now. 6.
Last one. Last
Okay.
one, Gene.
All righty. 5381.
538.
5381.
Bingo.
Nobody? Bueller?
Wow. Oh, there we go. He just
All right.
you're
Okay.
late.
All right.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Yeah. All right, let's give another round of applause for Scott. For a wonderful presentation, especially interaction. So this concludes our session at this time. Next up, we're going to have our friend Susan Moulton and her team from Waste Management join us to discuss another issue that we're dealing with, and that's finding ways to do our work given the personnel challenges that we're facing across the board. So I'm pretty sure this is going to be a big topic for everyone. I know it was also a topic of discussion at WasteCon last week. So looking forward to having another discussion. So we'll take a few minutes in between time. But thank you all again for your time and attention. Don't go anywhere. We're just going to do a set change. Yeah.